Hello, my name is Greg Cooper. Today I'm going to discuss high dynamic range photography, otherwise known as HDR. This discussion will be focused on beginning HDR enthusiasts and folks that are new to HDR and just curious about HDR. If you already are familiar with HDR methods, you may not get a lot out of this, but you never know. I will demonstrate quick and easy methods of creating a single editable HDR image from a bracket of 5 exposures using Adobe Lightroom's own merged HDR function, as well as Aurora HDR, a plugin that works within Lightroom. So, why use HDR? Well, for me, HDR processing methods have become a standard in my routine, both in the field and while post-processing. I have found that trying to edit a single image shot at night is nearly impossible to get to a place that satisfies both my requirements for exposure values and detail, mainly because my camera cannot capture the range of light necessary for a proper edit. Bright stage lighting creates overexposures that are impossible to recover highlights from, and dark nooks and crannies are difficult to raise detail from in post-production without ugly noise. That being said, today's newer generations of cameras, particularly those from Nikon and Sony, have very, very good sensors that are more than capable of doing single edit exposures, single frame edit exposures from a nighttime scene. Our own Sean Spansel is very good at this and has had great success at making single image edits at night. But for me, the solution is to shoot a series of photographs that span the exposure values of a scene from normally exposed to underexposed and overexposed, and then combining all of those images into a single image that contain the light values from all of the exposures. That was a very simplified explanation of how an HDR image is created, but if you want to know more technical details, it is all out there and I encourage you to look it up. To demonstrate the need for HDR processing, I have chosen a scene shot at Disneyland in 2013 of the Adventureland Gateway and the Enchanted Tiki Room queue. I have never processed this shot before, don't know why, but now this scene has changed dramatically, so this will offer both a historical look back and a first-time edit for both of us. You can see that I have opened Adobe Lightroom and have a series of 5 exposures queued up in the preview pane. These are bracketed exposures of the scene set up on my Canon 5D Mark III to record a bracket of -2, -1, 0, +1, and +2 exposure values. The camera was fitted with a Rokinon 14mm wide-angle lens. This is a fully manual lens, set to f9, and the camera was set to ISO 160, using the aperture priority mode, which is how I usually roll. The middle image, or 0 exposure value, pictured here in the main editing frame, is what the camera considers the optimal exposure based upon the settings and where I metered, which in this case was the brightest spots, the tiki torches. You can see that if I were trying to edit this as a single image, there are areas that will be difficult to recover, such as the overexposed portions of the signs, the very dark areas in the queue and down the street, and also the dark and ugly sky. Lightroom has a very, very good automatic exposure setting that can recover almost every aspect of this photo. We can, with one push, get to a spot that is a good starting point for a single image edit. However, this photo is showing some very bad features, such as the overexposed signs, which are not going to be recovered any way I try. For example, I could take the highlight slider and move it down, and the data does not appear at all. In fact, it just shows up as gray blobs. So this image is completely worthless to me as a single image edit. However, we can fix that by using HDR methods. Now, to begin the HDR conversion process, I've taken our 5 images down here, and I need to convert those into a single HDR image, but I want all of these images to have the same values. For example, if these images had different lens correction and different light values, it would make a completely bogus HDR image. So we may need to make sure they're all the same. Using the 0 image, I'm going to select the white balance tab and select auto. I find that Lightroom has got a very good auto function on white balance. It really does get me to a place where I like to start. And also, we want to move the lens corrections tab to enable profile corrections. This is a manual lens, and this camera has no idea what's on it, so we're going to tell it it's a Rokinon lens. And because I've used this lens before, it already has the 14mm profile here. Now we need to get the other images to look identical to this image, and we're going to do that by pushing the Control key and selecting all 5 images, and the Sync button, which will bring them all into the same look in color. You can see that by clicking on one or the other, they're all in the same lens profile correction. And by the way, we can look at that lens profile correction right here. You can see that Rokinon 14mm lens has got a bubble in the middle of it that Lightroom has effectively fixed. Now from here, if we right click on an image, we can go to Lightroom's own included merging function called Merge to HDR. And by selecting that, we get a submenu tab that shows up. There are several buttons here. We can choose the auto align, which I always do, even though these images were shot on a tripod. I still select the auto alignment tab. Auto settings button, that would erase all of the lens corrections and color corrections we did, and it would apply its own, which I don't want. Deghosting. So in HDR merges, ghosting refers to things that have moved through the scene during the long exposure process of these images. For example, the longest exposure of these 5 images was 25 seconds, that being this last image, the +2 image. And in that image, there's a security cast member that shows up, and he's right here on the side of the screen. You can't see him very well here, but we will in a minute. All of these HDR merge programs include a deghosting function that will help remove those unwanted, ghostly looking, wandering people through our shots. I don't have very much control over what it's doing to remove those ghosts. You can control a little bit of it, but me being a control freak, I like to do it my own self. So I'm going to select no deghosting, and we're going to fix that later, which I'll demonstrate for you. Pushing the merge button, that gets all the images crunching down into one. If you have an older computer, this might take a few minutes. In my case, it's fairly quick. And here we have Lightroom's merged photo. This is Lightroom's version of the photo with everything stacked in it. All the light values are down, stacked together into one editable image. And we could see that by moving the exposure adjustment slider, we can go way up and way down with this image any way we want. So to begin the process, I'm going to move the slider up to a value of about there. I'm just going to do some very basic edits here. The highlights tab, if you recall, the Adventureland sign was overexposed, and by moving the highlights slider, we can adjust that and make that sign look exactly perfect. And we can also go to the Enchanted Tiki Room sign, and we can see those same adjustments which were completely blown out before now are looking very nice. Also, in this close-up, you will notice that the flames of the tiki torches are ghosted. There are elements from all 5 exposures showing up in these moving flames. So that is undesirable in our final shot. We will fix that also. So here, this is all the editing that I'm going to do to the shot. I'm going to send it into Photoshop now for some final fixes. And here we go. Here it is in Photoshop. I have previously imported into Photoshop a couple of images from our bracket of 5. This is the +1 image, and this is the -1 image. I'm going to use this to control the tiki torches. And this is the +1 image. I'm going to use this to remove Mr. Security Cast Member standing here on the far right side of our picture. Now, Mr. Security Cast Member has wandered along into my scene during the last 25-second exposure to tell us that it's time to move along because the park is closed. Being the good Disney photographer that we are, we politely say, okay, no problem. And we finish our exposure and move along to where we repeat the same song and dance at the hub a few minutes later. Generally speaking, I have never had a truly disastrous experience with security cast members. I've had some experiences, both good and bad, but generally speaking, if everyone is polite, there's usually no issues. All they want to do is go home. All you want to do is get your photo, and somewhere in the middle, you guys work out an agreement, usually to their satisfaction and not yours, but that's another story. So anyway, let's remove Mr. Security Cast Member by clicking on the cleanup shot that I previously selected. We're going to Control A to select it, Control C to copy it, and Control V to merge it into the HDR as a layer. So here we have our cleanup shot, and it's sitting on top of the final image. And I like to move them down below. That's just the way I do my masking. You can do the masking from above or below. Change the brush color to white or black, depending. So here we can see that there's a slight misalignment of the images. We need to fix that. Select both images, go to the Edit tab, Auto Align the layers, select the Auto button, and OK. And now we can see that it's done a good job of lining up those layers. And also by clicking back and forth, you can see that there are certain things in the cleanup image that are showing up that aren't showing up in the final HDR. Things like these lighting effects in the queue, which I like. Obviously, that goes to security cast members, so we may play with some of that. So we're going to put a mask onto the top layer. We're going to select our brush. I want to use 100% opacity for this part. A brush size that is appropriate, and that looks fine. And now we're just going to paint over Mr. Security Cast Member until he disappears. And also you'll notice that there's some ghosting going on in the street here too, so we are also going to paint over that. So that we get a nice clean image. And that looks pretty good. Now, going over here to look at some of the lighting effects in the queue, you can see that there's some very interesting things going on in there, and I might want to pick up on some of that. So to do that, I'm going to reduce the opacity of that brush down to about 30%. I don't want to take it all at once. I'm going to reduce the diameter of our brush, and we're just going to start painting in this area. And you can switch back and forth between the two shots and see exactly what you like. I like this going on back in here. We can also see this guy in the background. I just noticed him. I'm going to use the shot to remove most of him. He's mostly taken care of. It's good enough for now. Opacity back to about 30. And looking at the scene again, I like some of the purple lighting going on. Want more of this. And we're just drawing in areas that we like, punching through the one layer into the other and bringing it forward. The purple lighting on the bucket I liked. What else? A little bit down here that I like. And we don't have to take it all. We're only taking 30% at a time. And that looks pretty good. There's still a little bit of ghosting going on here. And I'm mostly happy with that, so we're going to let that go. I'm going to merge that down. And now we'll take care of the tiki torches. This is the image I've selected to fix the tiki torches. Selecting that image again, copying it, and pasting it on top of the HDR. We will repeat the same process as before. Selecting the layers, lining them up. Putting a mask onto that one layer. And we can see that it lines up pretty good. And now we can do the same thing with our tiki torches, and we'll go to 100% on this one. And we will just start painting into the tiki torches down below till we're happy with what's disappeared and what's appearing. Now, one thing that you will notice is that because that was the -1 image and it's being brought into a relatively clean image without a lot of noise, you can see that there's a halo of noise where we've just punched through to the other layer, and we'll have to address that in a minute. So here we go again. And we can go a little bit wider to get some of the effect of the tiki torch. You can see that there's also a mismatch in exposure. The new areas that I'm masking in are darker as well as noisier, so we're going to address that as well. We've got to be careful with this one. I want to remove what I just did, and we're going to be very, very careful as we brush into this one. Go back to the, because if we take too much, it's going to affect that sign a lot. So we might have to settle for this. And that's fine. Now, to fix these darker areas and the noisier areas, we're going to make a slight adjustment onto that bottom layer. We can very simply bring that up to match the other image with the brightness adjustment. Just a very simple adjustment that brings it more up to speed with the other image. And this is all by feel. We'll go with that for now. And then also I want to apply a little bit of noise wear to it. This is Idiomatic Noise Wear's filter. I don't use it as a global adjustment. I use it very specifically in some areas. And here you can see that it's done a good job of removing the noisy, ugly part. But I don't like the radiance effect very much. So I'm going to go back and adjust that a little bit. We're going to reduce the opacity on our brush, and we're going to just whittle away on that until, as you can see, some of the ghosting comes back. We'll have to fix that a little bit. Very specifically look at that. So fire and flame can be a bit tricky sometimes. But overall, I'm not unhappy with that, and I would spend a lot more time fixing that up. But for demonstration purposes, that's pretty good. So there we have a mostly finished image. From here, we can duplicate that layer and apply another minor adjustment using the Camera Raw filter. There's a lot of adjustments we can do, but I'm just going to change the temperature a little bit. I'm going to slide it down into the cooler zone just a tad, just a little bit. And maybe add a little bit of contrast to the image. And maybe bring some highlights down a little bit more. And we'll call that good. And there's more or less a final edit of that shot. Like I said, there's a lot to be done. Particularly the areas around the tiki torch I'm not happy with. I would have to spend more time fixing that. But you get the basic idea. So that's the first method of doing an HDR merge using Adobe's Lightroom. Let's examine another method. Back to Lightroom, and we will again select our 5 shots. Right-clicking on one of them. This time we are going to edit in Aurora HDR. we are going to use the Lightroom adjustments. And this will open up Aurora HDR's editing panel. As you can see, it's also converting the raw images to TIFF files. It's making a duplicate in TIFF that Aurora is using to create its image. Now, the Aurora panel shows you that it's a -2, -1, 0, +1, and +2 image. We also can select auto alignment, and you can also select deghosting functions here. We're just going to select the auto alignment and tell it to create our HDR. Now, like the other HDR program, it's going to crunch here for a minute. Like I said, if you have an older machine, this might take a while. And here we have Aurora HDR's edit of the scene, what it thinks is the best compromise. As you can see, it's done a lot of what the merged HDR has done, in that it's left our security cast member in place. Some of the flames are still ghosted here. And most of the other issues in this photo are the same. But there's one thing that Aurora HDR does that the other program does not, and that includes a full panel of effects editing over here on the right. In fact, I believe it's probably the same that's included in the other sister program to this. This name escapes me right now. Skylum's darn it, sorry, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, you can make exposure adjustments just like in the basic panel of Lightroom. And you can do a lot of HDR trickery here. You could add a lot of extra detail. If you look in the panel here, as I'm sliding these cues up, the scene is getting crunchier and crunchier and crunchier. And these are all, there's several of these sliders that you can boost the amount of detail enormously. Also, I like that they've picked up on the purple shading and the cue on this automatically. But you've got radiance adjustments, you've got glow adjustments. This is similar to Glamour Glow in color effects. You can add a gradient from top to bottom. You can choose an exposure value. You can choose a contrast value. And you could change the orientation of that from vertical to horizontal. You could change how far it goes down. So you have immense control. You can handle curves. You can do individual color separations. So the one thing that Aurora gives you that that merged to HDR does not is immense control over the final image. So from there, though, basically I would take this image without any of those fancy adjustments into it and take it into Photoshop and do very much the same kind of adjustments that we did to the other image. So those are your basic HDR merges using two different methods through the Lightroom interface. And if you have any questions, you can direct them into the comments below this posting. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.